Well, it is now the afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Welcome back to Peachtree Christian Church, a cathedral for the city of Atlanta. You know me if you're here, probably. I'm Reverend Jared Longbonds, the senior minister here, and to my left is David Dickey, who is the president of Dickey Broadcasting, and that hosts the radio program 680 The Fan on 93.7. I have to tell a few things first before we get underway, but we should always say thanks to God for the food we eat. Don't you agree? So let's actually say a moment of grace together as we bless the food that we've been enjoying or have already enjoyed. God, we thank you for this food and the opportunity to gather as your people in the midst of the day, to be edified as we think about leadership and we think about a life worth living in service to others. It's in your Son's holy and precious name we pray, and everyone says together, Amen. Good, good. So let me tell you a little something about myself, because I know you all came here today to hear me talk about myself. I grew up a rabid St. Louis Cardinals fan. It was something that was in the water. You had to be a Cardinals fan in my family where we're from, and every year we'd go down to St. Louis from the city we lived in Illinois, and we'd take in several games, and we would do St. Louis stuff. If you've been to St. Louis, they have this little mall called Central Station. What's it called? I just dropped it. Union Station. Thank you, Dee. And we were walking through Union Station as a family, and there was this baseball player that the St. Louis Cardinals had in the outfield I really liked. His name was Brian Jordan. Y'all ever hear of Brian Jordan? As we're walking out of the mall and walking toward our cars, my dad says, "Hey, bud, it's Brian Jordan." I turn around and I see Brian Jordan turn around and he sees me and he starts running as fast as he can away. And I start trying to chase him. Now, I think he was also a football player, but nevertheless, he was a professional athlete. He got me running behind him in the mall saying, "Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan," trying to get his attention. Now, of course, I think he was busy. He probably had to date or something. I never got Brian Jordan that day. I never caught him, and I always wish I had caught him and told him how much I liked him and gotten his autograph. If you fast forward my life quite a bit, I came here to Peachtree. I've been here about 10 years starting this fall, and I got to know the David Dickey a little bit from coming to church and talking to him about his sports radio station. I told him how I'm a big fan and how much I listen to the station. In fact, one of Marcella's phrases that she used to say when she would come home, when I would pick her up from daycare, is, "Up to the minute traffic, 680 The Fan." And my wife thought I was brainwashing her. So here we are. David has a new studio at the time. It's over in the Battery. And he says, "Come on over. I'd like to show you around." And very graciously invited me over. And I got to see the whole outfit over there, which is really quite beautiful. And then he said, "Let's go to have lunch over at Sports and Social over at the Battery." And as we're walking, there's a man who calls out, "David Dickey!" And he wants David Dickey's attention. And I turn around, and you know who that man was? Brian Jordan. He didn't chase me down, but he was chasing you down. So anyway, that made me think that you were even extra cooler than I already think you are now. So everybody, would you welcome Mr. Dickey with a round of applause?
Thank you very much.
So you were married here, correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about that?
May 16, 1998. It's a little over 25 years ago. And it was a midday wedding. I think we had a little, I swear the wedding's okay. The marriage is good. Okay, so despite what you just heard, we were married at 11 a.m. And I'm not sure why, but when met my wife, believe it or not, at OK Cafe, my wife Paula, and she is definitely the better half of our family, and a wonderful person, smart person, hardworking person, and has had a career just now about to retire after 35 years. And they sold their company, and so she's juggled being a mother of two and trying to keep me honest and her career, and I have just immense respect for her and what she's accomplished and how she conducts herself. So she's actually at about 40,000 feet as we speak, flying back from Italy right now with her mother and her two sisters, as her mother turns 80 in November. So they took them over there. But we got married at 11 a.m. on a Saturday, and Met her at OK Cafe. We dated, and for a year, got engaged. And then I said, my big decision was, asking you to marry me. We can do it tomorrow. We can do it 2 years from now, but I'm in. And I think she probably didn't trust me, and so she planned it as quickly as she possibly could. And about 90 days later, we were married here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Go ahead, yeah, applaud that. I always think you ought to applaud people who absolutely adore their spouse, and I love hearing that story. So we've asked David to come start off this series that we're doing called Leadership Lunches, where we're going to be talking to leaders about their leadership experience, their ideas, their habits, any way that we can sharpen our own mind. And so that means the first question I have to ask David Dickey, who runs a sports radio program or whole station, is UGA your team or Georgia Tech?
I'm a Florida Gator. So I don't give a damn. I don't know if I can say that right now, but in the church. But now we are. I was University of Florida undergrad and law school. I'm a licensed attorney, but I don't practice. But so I'm an SEC person. And when we launched the fan back in 1993, March of '93, so we just turned 30 years old earlier this year. We introduced Sports Talk My Family to the city of Atlanta, which was a relatively new format at the time. And we didn't have the Braves. They'd been with WSB for a long, long time, great radio station, and didn't have the Falcons or the Hawks, and the Thrashers weren't around at the time. And but we had inherited the Georgia Tech relationship with Homer Rice, who was the athletic director back then, and a previous owner of Ring Radio, which is the company we bought, was Kim King, the former quarterback at Georgia Tech. And I had immense respect for Kim, and he was a great guy, and unfortunately left us too soon, but a wonderful man and treated us very, very well, treated me very, very well. We continue to be the flagship of Georgia Tech, but I've been trying with every bone in my body to get the Georgia relationship away from WSB for the last 30 years. And it took me 15 years to get the Braves away, and this is our 14th year with the Atlanta Braves. But I'm not going to quit. We're going to get Georgia. But when we launched the fan, not having a lot of the teams other than Georgia Tech, we knew we needed to make the radio station about college football. It was AM only, 680 AM, and not a lot of young people were going to listen to AM. Music obviously was the thing, and on FM. And you already had, if you all have been around here for a while, you remember WSB and WGST 640, and they were a great battle back and forth. We didn't need to be the third news talk in town. So Sports Talk was just starting. Braves had just gone from worst to first. And just in what was it, Game 7 of the World Series in '91, we lost in extra innings, I think. And so as exciting and as tough as that was to take, the Olympics were coming. Georgia Tech had won the national championship in '90, University of Georgia in '80. So we knew that we needed to build a sports talk radio station around college football. And if we could do that, all of the kids that were graduating around Georgia and the Southeast that were coming here to work for Ted Turner, when they graduated, we knew that we could get their patronage, at least if we were talking about their alma mater. And so it started with the mindset that we were going to focus on college football. And from that, the goal was to try to then plug in Braves baseball, because to me, the demographic, the profile of somebody who embraces college football, I don't care if it's Georgia Tech. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Opa.
Now, but very quickly, in '93, we started the fan to introduce Sports Talk, and we did it with the thought that we wanted to do focus on college football. That was a way, it was really being underserved in Atlanta, number one. It was a format not in Atlanta at the time. Believe it or not, the first sports talk radio station in America was in New York, WFAN in New York, and 660 AM. And it's still doing sports, by the way, and they did it in 1987. And when they launched, a company called MS Broadcasting owned it at the time, and they decided to go all sports. Now, this is New York City. Despite what you might think of New York City, it's a great sports town. And they take their sports seriously. They're very passionate about their sports. And yet, when he floated the idea to local, to the ad agencies and media buyers in New York at the time, in 1987, that they were going to go 24/7 sports, people thought he was crazy. Nobody would listen to, a sports talk, a sports conversation all day and all night. And yet became obviously huge, one of the biggest billion radio stations in America. We hired those guys, the programmers, to come down and consult us to help us put on the Fan back in '93. And of course, they came down and said, well, you got to talk NFL, NBA, and NHL. And I went, hold on, Gilligan. Hold on. This is the South, brother. This is the South. More flags fly on Saturday than Sunday. So we're going to talk about the SEC. We're going to talk about the ACC. We're going to talk about tailgating. And we're going to leave it at that. Well, we got to do NBA? No, we're going to talk about all of the other sports. Don't get me wrong. But what you don't understand north of the Mason-Dixon, college football is 12 months a year. And so that will sustain our efforts to build a conversation and ultimately build a listenership of people. If we're talking about your alma mater, then there's a good chance you're going to tune us in. And then the only thing I have to do, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about, is hopefully hire competent people that know what they're doing and that can, whether you agree or disagree with them, hopefully you're still listening to them. You love them or you love to hate them. And that's really how you build a great talk show. Howard Stern made a lot of money doing that. Rush Limbaugh made a lot of money doing that. And again, whether you like or dislike those guys, past or present, you listened. And you loved them or you hated them, but you still listened. And so from a sports talk perspective, we brought those guys down, decided to go ahead and build a format around college football. And then to me, we could always go vertical with football. We could start to do high school. And several years later, we started doing high school content, a scoreboard show. And then, interestingly enough, if I can say this, we were doing a scoreboard show. Fox 5, the old High Five Sports, they were the only ones in town at the time doing high school athletics for the most part. And nobody on radio was doing it. We decided I wanted to do a scoreboard show. And we did it for 2 or 3 years. And then I told our guys, and we were the Georgia Tech flagship, football and basketball. But that's all the play-by-play we had at the time. And I said, I want to go ahead and I want to do high school play-by-play. We knocked on in the spring of, I might have been 2001 or 2000, we knocked on about 26 schools and talked to the athletic directors of high schools, area high schools, north, south, east, and west, big, 7A, 1A, whatever, public, private, and said, we want to come in this fall and broadcast your game. Just give us a little place in the radio booth. We'll hang a banner. It's just going to say The Fan. And then at the time, we'll give you a DVD of the call of the game for your archives. 26 conversations, all 26 turned us down because they thought that sort of the Trojan horse, they weren't quite sure what we were up to. And we finally got one to agree that I think late August, we aired the game. And by Wednesday of the following week, 24 of the 26 had called us and said, can you do our game? And the neat thing is, by recording those games, we had a lot of, this unintended consequences, but I'm very proud of this. By doing that and providing the school with a copy of the game, we got really good at our guys calling the game. And I found experts in high school space that really loved high school football and knew these kids really well. Again, all over town, no matter who they were following these kids and really celebrating their accomplishments and their athletic ability. And the programs and the coaches. And we had some folks, occasionally, this is by, 2007, 2008, 2009, I had people reach out to me on occasion saying, your guys were really kind. My son had a great game. He was a punter or a receiver or running back. They were really complimentary of my son. We took the audio and we put it into a highlight reel and sent it off to colleges, and he got a scholarship. And we think partly because of you guys. And I think that to me is far more important than selling commercials, quite frankly.
Well, you definitely have does this even work? Okay, you definitely have a wonderful team over there, and you got to love some of the talent, and you got to love to hate some of the talent. That's definitely, they try to play that up, you can tell.
Overpriced morons, I like to call them. But, yeah.
Well, what are for you as a person who hires these teams? What are the fundamentals for you about team building? When you're looking to build a team, what are you looking for? What thoughts do you have on that?
3 key things to building a team, a successful team: people, and people. And if that's not enough peace for you, then I'm going to say persistence and passion. But it really comes down to people. And it's not a matter of hiring the most expensive people. The Yankees and the Mets did a great job of that this year, and where are they? They're home watching it on ESPN. I had a conversation a couple of years, about a year ago, with Terry McGuirk, as you all know, chairman of the Braves. So he's been a part of that organization for a long, long time. And we were talking about Steve Cohen spending what he did, I think a couple of $1 billion on the Mets, and then immediately running up the payroll and just bringing in all of these Hall of Famers, pitchers and other guys, and just the payroll was insane, just what he was paying these guys. And I asked Terry, I said, will that work? He said, in the regular season, yes. In the postseason, no. And I said, why? He said, because in the postseason, it's about chemistry. In the postseason, it's about guys having the other guys back and really wanting to win. You give those guys $30, $40 million a year over 10 years, they really don't give a darn. And they don't really care about each other. They got theirs. And for some of them, they're playing for a legacy, for the Hall of Fame. For others, they've already, as you all know in baseball, the money's guaranteed. And so, even if they're injured, you got to do something pretty bad to have your contract canceled. So it's generational for those guys. When they get $50, $100, $200, $300 million. And Oshani, well, we'll see what happens in that contract coming up. And injury is going to add a little intrigue to that. But I don't believe the $400, $500, $600 million numbers that have been thrown out. But that young man's phenomenal, and we'll see what he gets. It's about people. When the San Francisco Giants several years ago won what was it, 3 out of 5 or so, we actually we owned a small percentage of the Giants at the time. This was a great group of guys that just had a blue-collar mentality. And how many times in a team sport, NFL, NBA, and obviously baseball, you've seen all these superstars, a lot of money, big egos, and they have the entourage and all the cars and the women and everything, and they can't win a darn game.
Shit. That's like the Hawks of 2013.
We've seen examples of that here locally and certainly throughout the league. But again, we're in the baseball and in the postseason now, and so I point to obviously the Mets and the Yankees, even the Red Sox at times. But it's about people. My father, God rest his soul, we lost him 10 years ago, Thanksgiving Day, and he always told me, hire good people, give them the tools they need, and then get out of the way and let them do their thing. And I think that's critically important. It starts with people. And I talked about passion and persistence, but I want somebody who's as passionate about our industry and what we do for a living as I am. And that part, I set the bar high. Remember, I'm a Gator, so the competency level is really low. I had to throw that in for all the Georgia fans in town. But the passion meter is off the charts for me, because it is, we can't control the economy, we can't control health, we can't control the competitive landscape. People always say, do you listen to that sports talk or that sports talk or that news talk? And they're surprised to hear, I don't listen to the competition. Well, why not? Because if I don't own them, I can't do anything about them. I don't have a say in what they do or how they do it. So I really don't care. Having limited gray matter as a Gator, I have to use it, judiciously to make sure that I really focus on the things that matter. And for me, it is attracting and keeping quality people that have the ethics and the moral fiber that matches that of our company, and that, quite frankly, that hopefully are better people than I am.
So what happens when you have, you say the bad apple spoils the whole bunch or whatever. You have somebody, it turns out it's not working out. What's your process of sorting that out, of thinking through, is it time to move on from this relationship? I mean, I've listened to you for 10 years and people have come and gone, and I don't know the stories, but I know you've had to make decisions. And
I think one of the toughest things in business and maybe in life is knowing when to sort of pull the trigger, if you will, and decide it's just not working out. It's not the right fit. And there are different reasons, or many reasons why it's not the right fit. I brought in a gentleman, I'll be nameless, was with us for a cup of coffee, but in the 6 months he was with me, I spent more management time dealing with his issues and his complaints, which, by the way, were baseless, than everybody else combined over the last 10 years. And so at that point, I just said, it's not working out. Pandemic came, it hammered media, it hammered sports, everything stopped. I've done this, I've grown up in this business. I've actively done it for 40 years. I've never seen anything like that with the pandemic where all advertising stopped and we have news talk as well as sports talk, but our sports, everything stopped. So you had to make some tough decisions and in sort of a one-off situation there, from an economic standpoint. But it's the first time in my career, 35 plus years at the time, that I had to make decisions based on that. And I thank the Lord that I've never had to do that, partly because of, I think, how we've run the companies, and partly because of the people that we've attracted to be a part of the companies. But if you nobody bats 1,000, as they say, and if you find that you've not made the right choice, or they interviewed well but turned out to be somebody different, or they, quite frankly, people change. And circumstances change, and what was a good fit may not be a good fit moving forward. Then I think you have to. I think everybody has to be an adult in the room and understand that continuing that can only lead to bad things, and you have to have the courage to, quite frankly, I think, say enough is enough. We tried, but we're going to go in another direction.
Earlier, you talked about your values. You said that you want to hire people who are better people than you. How do you communicate your values with your team? Is this something like a mantra that you talk about a lot? Is it part of the corporate culture you try to build, or do you just kind of let it be there in the ether, as it were?
All the above. I think it is. As my mother still reminds me at 87, God bless her, you're judged by your actions, and you're judged by the company you keep. And I think you have to lead it. You have to live it. And I think people, I give people a lot more credit than most companies, and certainly most of the media. People are smart. People are perceptive, and they will watch and what you're doing and how you're doing it. In a situation where we could have not said anything, and they sent us the wrong amount and kept the difference, or double paid us, kept the money, or whatever it might be. What I always like to say in those situations, that's not how we treat people. That's not how we do business. And while it would be easier to go this way, or it'd be more lucrative to do this, you have to me, it's not the tougher decision, because if that's just the way you think, and if you're in the habit of saying that, we don't treat people that way. We don't do partnerships that way, and we don't act that way. Then I think people not only see that, but they embrace that. And they already know what would David say. And I think that if you can, and part of that you gain from just longevity of your staff. And I'm blessed with, I think, the longest running, the most tenured staff in Atlanta media, period. On air, business, sales. I've got the most tenured staff, period. I pay them well. It's a great company to work with. Nobody works for me. We all work together. And ultimately, they know what I will say. They know what I would do under those circumstances. And so I don't have to be there for our company to make the same decision.
Now you lead a team of big personalities. That's the business. Do you handle everybody the same, or do you handle people case by case based on their personality?
It's a great, and it's a great question, because it applies to, I think, family. Everybody that have kids, your kids come from the same stock and cut from the same cloth, but they can be very, very different people. And I don't think you can do cookie cutter. In a sales context, what I have, and all the sales managers that I've hired and trained and managed over the years, I've always told them that you have 12 salespeople on your team. It's a lot more difficult to get 12 people to speak your language than for you to speak 12 different languages. Go speak in terms that each individual understands and relates to, and they'll react better from that standpoint. Very, very difficult if you've got a great group of people. They're going to have diverse backgrounds and talents and perspectives, political, social, religious, whatever, and to expect all of them to push all of that aside and just sort of salute your flag doesn't make a lot of sense. So from a talent perspective, they're all, I joke and say overpriced morons, but they really are. But they all have big egos. Otherwise, they wouldn't do what they do. They're all incredibly talented people. Lord knows I can't do this, as you're witnessing right now, for a living. But they can sit there and talk for a 2, 3, 4-hour show, or call a Braves game, and do it seamlessly. And one of the reasons that we got through the pandemic when everything stopped, and by the way, ESPN did not. If you watched ESPN television during the pandemic, they were horrible. Horrible. And I'm on a board at ESPN. They were horrible. Why? Because they no longer have talented, tenured men and women that were coaches or players or journalists, on set. They hire a bunch of young, cheap, good-looking people that know how to read a teleprompter. And look at the highlight of LeBron. Well, guess what? LeBron wasn't playing. So there was nothing to point to. And they literally were paralyzed. They begged Michael Jordan. And 7 or 8, 9 times Jordan turned them down to start that. If you all saw what they aired for Michael Jordan on his what do they call that? I forget. Yeah, The Last Dance. Yeah, that wasn't supposed to come out for 2 or 3 months later, and they begged him to get it on earlier because they had nothing, and everything was plummeting at ESPN at the time. Our guys, on the other hand, are all adults. Most are married. Most have kids. All of them have been in Atlanta for a long time. They've witnessed worst to first. They've witnessed the Olympics. They've witnessed all of these things, and they could. And we all sat and said, well, they said, Dave, what are we going to do? I said, people need comfort. The one thing that matters right now is family and normalcy. And we can give them normalcy by just talking about the way it was with the Braves last year, or what we can't wait for sports to come back. Because nothing's happening right now, but you can reminisce. You can give everybody the comfort that they need, because it's scary right now, and everybody's outside in the cul-de-sac throwing a frisbee or a baseball with their son or daughter. Thank goodness. That, to me, was a benefit of the pandemic. So let's give them some comfort food in the form of just talking about their alma mater, talking about their favorite baseball team, and just talking about how much we can't wait for sports to get back up and running.
Can you share of a time when in your organization you went through a very challenging, rough patch? Something was tough, but it actually made the organization and you better for it.
Well, pandemic for sure, but we've all heard too much about the pandemic. But I think 9/11 was a tough go because it scared the heck out of everybody, and the mindset of local businesses. The average radio station in America does 85% of their annual revenues with ad agencies. It's very transactional, and only about 15% with a local relationship with a local man or woman that owns or operates a business. We're the polar opposite. We're about 85% local direct. And I don't want to be dependent on an ad agency that can come and go. I don't want to be dependent on Nielsen in terms of their measurement. And, I spend a lot of money with Nielsen for them to tell me I'm horrible. I always joke and say my mother-in-law does that for free. So we instead will develop relationships out on the streets. We have more boots on the ground than anybody. And I've always told people, tell us where it hurts. Tell us what you need to help you achieve your goals in marketing or sales with your business, and allow us to sort of manipulate our platform, our menu, to help you achieve your goals. 9/11 came, and I think everybody was just absolutely scared to death for a short period of time. They did not know what to do or how to do it, and the lessons learned from there, quite frankly, helped us with the pandemic, because we reached out to everybody and sent. I made sure that everybody, I said, we're going to go see every client, kind of like that old commercial with FedEx. We're going to go see every client face to face, and we're going to go hold their hand, and we're going to tell them it's going to be okay. And we're not quite sure when the planes are going to take off again, and we're not quite sure if they're going to be more terrorist attacks. But America is safe, and customers still need their products or services, and we're here to help them let Atlantans and Georgians know that they're open for business. And it's amazing what that did for people. And we did the same thing, by the way, during the pandemic. When we worked every day. I never missed a day in the office throughout the pandemic. And I told my staff, you can do what you want, but I'm going to be here, And you can work from home if you want, or you can come into here, and we're going to take all the safety precautions, everything possible. My whole crew, with the exception of a few, one of which I sent home and said, you need to be home. But my whole crew said, we want to be here. We want to be here. And we were the only media company in Atlanta for the first 4 or 5 months of the pandemic that were literally in the office. And they could get us and say, I have no idea how to market in this environment. I need help. And we were there to not only help them and answer their questions, but also help them with production and commercials, record new commercials. We weren't letting anybody in the office. And I had our team, it was democracy. We voted on everything. How do you want to handle this? Well, in a majority rules. And we were all unified in how we did that. But what we learned with 9/11, we were able to take to the pandemic and overcome that. But in the initial moment of those events occurring and the realization that, oh my God, I don't know what is next, that's scary. That's scary for all of us in terms of our lives, our families, our careers. You have a kid at school, it's scary because, there are planes crashing and my son or daughter, my parents were in New York. We had a place in New York. My parents at the time in 9/11, they had just flown out the night before 8 o'clock and they were in Paris. And I have 5 siblings and we were scared because, is this World War III? And our parents are over in Europe right now. And they, don't feel badly for them. They were at the Ritz-Carlton in Paris, but they ended up having to stay an extra week. But it was scary. And in that initial moment, I think you do have to look inward at your faith and say, give me some guidance here, because I don't know what's going on and I don't know how long this is going to last. But advice that my father has always given me, which is, number one, don't be in a hurry to make a mistake. So just slow it down, take your time, and just know that you're going to, one move at a time. And if you do each move carefully, and I like to do it, I like to phrase that today in sort of modern terms, not so modern anymore. I got through law school by listening to a lot of Pink Floyd. Figure out what that means to you. I'll let that go. But, Another Brick in the Wall is one of their songs, if you're not familiar with the Floyds and Pink Floyd. And I always will talk about another brick in the wall. And as long as we place those bricks carefully, one at a time, we can build a strong wall. Notwithstanding what's not happening on the southern border right now, but that's another story. We can build a strong wall if we do it one brick at a time. And you tend not to make mistakes if you carefully place each brick. And so I kind of, add for fun, quote Pink Floyd, but it really, really is true. You build a wall, you build a structure, you build a foundation, you build a company, you build a family, one brick at a time.
The way you ended that answer goes into where I was wanting to head next, which is about self-leadership. No, not at all. Self-leadership, all leaders have to start with themselves. So I like to ask questions like, what do you have any habits? Do you have any mottos? Do you have any values that are things that you would even go so far as to write them down and look at them? They're stuff that guides, and it's your moral compass or in your heading, your direction for you in your mind.
I don't know if I necessarily do. I think it's just my parents constantly preached, myself and my 5 siblings, they always said 3 things that were really important for us growing up. My dad always would say, get educated. They can't take that away from you. Number 2, stick together. And number 3, just, work hard, be honest. And my dad would, I was always at the dinner table, and we ate as a family 6 nights a week, and my mom and dad would eat by themselves on a Saturday night, but we had to wait for my dad to get home, and we were all together. And my dad was a radio executive, but I think really should have been a preacher, because he'd like to preach, but he would always say, and with his left hand, and I was to his left, he would kind of hit me on the shoulder with fingers like this, and he'd say, if you're apart, this is not very strong. And then I always hated this part. Then he'd put a fist together, and he'd say, if you're together, and then he'd punch me, But by the time I got out of the house, I had a lot of bruising there. But it's lessons like that ultimately I think my dad's been in heaven for 10 years, or almost coming up on 10 years, and I talk to him every day, and what would he say? What would he do? And I try to, quite frankly, follow that, and then lead by example. because ultimately I want the folks around me to say, what would David say? What would David do? And even though I may not have the expertise that they do in their particular department, but the moral compass has to be there. The culture, the values have to be there, because that will still govern every department, whether it's programming or promotions or production, sales, the business office. It has to be the same sort of moral compass, and we all have to be sort of shooting for the same bullseye. We have different perspective, different angles, but we have to all be shooting for the same bullseye, or it just doesn't work. I have a managers meeting every Monday morning at 10 a.m. And all my department heads, we get around the table, and there are about 14 of us in the room. And I asked them by Friday, close of business the week before, to give me their talking points, 3 or 4 or 5 talking points. And I put it into a syllabus for Monday morning. Do they get it to me by Friday at 5 o'clock? Heck no. It's usually Monday morning. I'm scrambling to put it together for the 10 o'clock meeting. And then I pass that out so everybody can see every department head's talking points. And we go around. And I often will quote movies and songs, just because I've been around that my whole career. But there's a line, if you remember the original Top Gun, and Maverick and Goose, and he's like, Mav, do that pilot blank. I will, when we are talking about something coming up, in this case, getting ready for the playoffs, which obviously start for the Braves on Saturday. Go Braves. Or George's run for hopefully a three-peat. All of those things, I will always sit there across the table and say, do that pilot, and I won't repeat that word right now, but I say that, and to them, my folks know that means, get the job done. Get the job done. You know what you're doing. You're here for a reason. If I need to do your job, then I've hired the wrong person. You're better at your job than I am. I'm here to support you. I'll catch you if you fall. Just do that pilot blank. Get the job done.
Brooks, what do we say before we preach? Let it rip.
Amen. Amen.
Other than your family, other than your job or your work, what do you live for?
Well, my kids first and foremost, but you said other than my family.
I'll let you have it.
Yeah. My son, David Jr., is a senior at Furman on the golf team, and my daughter, Caroline, is a sophomore at Wake Forest. And David just got into the business school at Wake Forest, so he'll be there next fall. And then my wife and I are excited because that's one parent's weekend, not two. So that's really good. But it also means a lot more tuition, so I'll be working for a lot longer. What do I live for? I'm a fairly one-dimensional guy. I hate to say. I really am. My faith is very important to me, but I don't wear it on my sleeve. But I pray a lot. I talk to my Father a lot. I talk to God a lot, 7 days a week. Family is very important to me. I'm a people person. I like people until I don't.
Amen.
Interpret that the way you want, but I really am. My siblings and I were raised to be colorblind. We were raised to not care who or what you are, but to look at the individual. In a former life, BP, which is before Paula, I had a lot of friends and even brothers that dated a certain looking girl. You'd be shocked at the variety of girls that I dated. Never really long relationships, but just sort of fun and going out a movie or ice cream or something. But you'd be shocked at the variety of women that I dated in my teens and 20s and in 30s, early 30s. It wasn't a look, it was chemistry. It was personality, and I either that person, we connected or we did not. And it wasn't it wasn't, again, what they look like or how they were shaped. It was really just, and I think the same thing with building companies and building teams. I don't care who you are or where you come from or what you look like. I'm looking for somebody who is going to fit our culture and be the best person I can find to do the job, in the opening that we have at that particular time. What else do I like to do? In a former life, I played competitive golf, but I can't break 100 today. But my son can. He's better than a scratch golfer, and that's the way it's supposed to be. You pass the torch on to the next generation. Work, family, I try to work out a little bit in the morning. I know you can't tell, and jog, and not enough. Also, I'm a watch guy. I watches and cars, but I'm a watch guy. I'm an avid watch collector, and have been for goodness 30+ years. Yeah,
That's cool. That's interesting. Is there a book that you've given out more than once on leadership or on something to do with wisdom that you've given out to many people because you like that book so much?
there is you put me on the spot, but there is a book that I quote a lot, and I have shared it, and it was a former Navy pilot, and he wrote a book, and I'll hopefully, when I'm driving back to the office, I'm going to remember the name of the book here, because that's how it works, especially for the Gator.
Find it.
Yeah.
We'll send it out.
But and I'll get it, and I'll share it with you. But it's this gentleman just talked about backups to the backups to the backups. And why? Because, and they have a mission, and they have a flight plan for a bombing or a reconnaissance or whatever it might be. Something doesn't always work out. Could be mechanical, could be that there's an enemy plane in the skies and they can't go that way, they got to go this way. Could be a weather pattern. And it could be, and that's why in those planes, mechanically, they have backups to the backups. Because if something fails at, 0.8, Mach, if you will, you're in trouble. And so I will often quote that with our folks. We do, we get a prospective advertiser at the Battery, and we're talking to them. I always tell them, this isn't about selling you radio commercials. This really is not. There are plenty of radio stations that'll do a decent job of selling you a radio commercial, a 30 or 60-second radio commercial. This is about taking your brand, your goals, and integrating them into our platform, into the daily conversation that we have had with Atlantans for 30+ years. And the best form of advertising, as we know, is word-of-mouth advertising. And I've had a lot of people over the years ask me, how do you guys grow and succeed when the radio industry overall is sort of doing this? And it is doing this, by the way. Well, sidebar, because the radio industry is largely controlled by public companies and private equity, and we know what happens when they take over. And there are very few families like mine left to where it's locally owned and operated, where we're invested in the community and we're with people, and we commute in the same streets that our listeners commute. And I've always said that to people, we succeed when others do not because of 4 words. And I say, what are 4 words? I know a guy. And that's really sums up my career. I know a guy. I know a gal. You go home and God forbid there's a tree on your garage. Your next door neighbor, Ralph, you don't really like him. He's a jerk. But he sees the look of horror on your face because a tree just fell over on your garage. You're going to say, Ralph, do you know anybody? Yeah, I know a guy. Ralph's not going to stare you wrong in your moment of need. You might not use that company, but you're probably going to call them. And that's really ultimately what we do, is integrate people that way to just make them part of the conversation. So what I preach to people is we do. It's not about radio spots. We do more events than anybody. We do more play-by-play events than anybody. The Atlanta Braves alone, 200 broadcast events annually on average between spring training, and we do every spring training game, the regular season, and knock on wood, all the way through early November here for game 5, 6, or 7 in the World Series. Hopefully game 4, and that's it, and we're done. But actually not. The more games, the more revenue. So I want 5 games coming up, and then I want 7 games in the World Series, as long as we come out on the winning side of things. But I preach to our folks all the time, and that's really the motto that I live by, and certainly that I try to get them to live by. And I try to impart that on my children as well. At 19 and 21, backups to the backups. Be prepared, and understand that things go wrong for no control of yours, no fault of yours. But you better have a clue what you're going to do next. If you don't, then shame on you.
If you were asked to give a TED Talk or a commencement speech, what's it about? It's the speech of your life.
Don't wait to be successful. And I've given that speech before. Don't wait to be successful. There's nothing in the law, and I'm an attorney. I've been licensed since 1990 in the state of Florida. There's nothing that I know of in the statutes or the federal law books that say that a young person can't be successful or whatever he or she wants to do. And I don't care what people tell you. I don't care what the social norms are, and I don't care what the law of averages say. Believe in yourself. Believe in your dream, as long as it's legal and it's morally and ethically correct, and never ever give up on that dream. Nobody says you have to wait 25 years to be a successful entrepreneur. Why can't you be a successful entrepreneur at 18? There are kids out there that have done quite well, just cutting grass. My brother Lou and I, we were growing up in Toledo, Ohio, way back in the day. We had a Jeep CJ5. I wish I still had that thing. I love that darn Jeep. Love that darn Jeep. But we had a snowplow on it. And Toledo was a small blue-collar town, still is, but even more so back then. And my parents owned an AM and an FM in town, but a real small town. I was 13, Lou was 15. Neither one of us had a driver's license. And yet we had a commercial snowplow business. And we did a lot of residential properties, at about $10 a pop. And then we had about a dozen commercial properties, restaurants and hardware stores and things like that, because this was before Home Depot and Lowe's, and it was all mom and pop type shops. And you know what Mother Nature didn't care about? That tomorrow we had to be at the bus stop. And it never snowed at about 3:45 after school. It always snowed about 10 o'clock at midnight. And, of course, my mother worried about it, but my father just said, those people are depending on you that when they open their business tomorrow morning, their driveway is clear. And so there were more than a handful of times, Lou and I would venture out in this CJ5 Renegade at 11 o'clock at night. I wouldn't do that with a 13 and a 15-year-old today, and certainly not in this city or most cities. But back in the 70s in Toledo, Ohio, wasn't bad. And my parents were as protective as anybody. But it wasn't, of course, we didn't use seatbelts back then. But, absolutely. Lucky strikes. We'd venture out, plow the driveways, get in at 2 in the morning, and guess what? My mom woke us up. My dad said, you wake them up. You make sure they're up. And there were more than a few times in social studies I was doing this. But that taught me commitment, but it also taught me at the time, it taught me responsibility, but it taught me that you did not have to be an adult to be a successful business person. And I think that really helped shape me, because oftentimes we have a lot of, we were talking about earlier today, we have a lot of interns, high school kids, but a lot of college kids that will come in and intern at Dickey Broadcasting. My kids went to Westminster for the whole time, and they have something called Jam Term. So for the month of January, the kids go to area businesses or organizations and work. And for the high school students, it's a great program. And so we always host a Jan Term program for Westminster. But we end up doing I think we had almost 20 interns this past summer. And great kids, and they want to get into production, or they want to get into programming, they want to get into sales or marketing or whatever it might be. And for me, it's about showing them the business, and they can decide if they want to study that in school, or they can decide if that's something they want to pursue. But the one thing, I'll come in and they have me come in and board the kids for 5 minutes at the beginning of it. And I always tell them, besides the only bad question is the one you don't answer, or the one you don't ask. But I always tell them is that if you like this, don't sit there and read all of the blogs and hear the podcast from disgruntled members of the media that didn't achieve success. Don't listen to them. If you have a dream and you think you have the talent, you're here to develop that and get some exposure, and then run with it. Don't listen to what somebody else failed to do. Just believe in what you yourself want to do, and believe you can do it. I'm here to help you as much as I possibly can. You got to put forth the work, because they're not going to hand it to you. But because that person, he or she failed, and they're really upset about it, does not mean, and it should not dictate your mindset on what you can and cannot do in this business, or any business for that matter.
I'm going to wrap up my questions with that one. I want to say thank you for your time. I want to see if anybody has a question or two, but thank you for your time, and thank you for what you give to the community. Sports is sports. It has its place in the world, but I also think we are creatures that are made to play. And so there's something in there about sports that also reveals something true about the meaning of the human life before God. We're creatures meant to be at play. We're creatures meant to be expressing ourselves. And so it is sometimes mindless watching of sports that we do or listening in, but oftentimes it is a nice, Chris, what would your dad say? It's a nice diversion from the days of work. And so thank you for what you do for that. Thank you for your kind words about what you say to the youth as well. I love that. Does anybody else have a question? We're going to start with ladies first, you two. Reverend Stone.
You keep talking about sports radio, but I have to tell you, for me, listening to your folks, a lot of it's comedy radio. I laugh really hard at a lot of the things they do. It's same with you. It's nice at the end of the day driving home to bubble up with some laughter. But I do have a sort of a technical question. I hear a lot about AM radio and AM signals going to have to go away, and we'll only have FM. Can you enlighten?
So just real quick, if you didn't hear that, will AM go away and FM be the only thing on the radio? Can you enlighten?
Well, and as we talked before today, thank you for listening. And it's a good group of people, and it is about laughter and about analysis. But they've got to have some humor into it. And sports is a diversion. And I preach to our guys all the time. People, they can get all the Fox News and CNN they want, but if they're tuning us in, it's because they don't want to listen to that right now. Okay, and so but think about it. If there's been politics have been involved in sports going back to Jesse Owens and Hitler, and what happened with the Israeli athletes, and more recently the NFL and kneeling. Politics, unfortunately, is a part of it, and the bigger sports gets, the bigger the world stage is, and naturally, people with agendas are going to take advantage of that, left, right, or center. I don't care. For us, I've always said we are that safe harbor. We have got to just avoid all of those things. And if somebody wants it, they can go to our news talks, Extra 106.3, or they can go to WSB, or they can go to the cable news networks. AM. There's been a lot of talk about AM pulling out, and it's really silly because it started with really to my knowledge, the electric manufacturers, because they said, well, the batteries and electric motors would create interference on the AM receiver. That may be technically true. I kid you not, it's a 45-cent filter that they could install, a 45-cent filter when they're building these things that they could install that literally would eliminate any of those issues whatsoever. But they, being a different mindset, they just didn't think it was necessary. However, what they don't realize with AM radio, and there's been a lot of pushback from not only AM operators around the country, but a lot of folks to Congress and eventually and the FCC answers to Congress, that the majority, when stuff's really going down, weather or news or tragedy, it's more times than not, you've got an AM radio on. You've got 750 on, or our news talk is 1230 and 106.3. You're listening to one of those WGN in Chicago, WABC in New York, or 1010 Winds. One of these big, iconic 760 WJR in Detroit, which is one of my favorite AM radio stations in America. And people in Hawaii with the fires, a lot of the information was disseminated to the residents of that island because of AM radio. And so I think, Congress tends to do whatever way the polls and the wind blows, left, right, or center. But when there was a lot of pushback, I think AM radio is going to be around. And more importantly, there are tens of millions of cars on the streets in this country with the average age of almost 12 years old. AM radio will be in our commuting vehicles for a long time, for largely the rest of our lifetimes. So AM radio will be around. FM radio will be around. You know where it's all going? Ultimately, streaming, where eventually you're going to be able to just stream the station. So it won't matter the FM signal or the AM signal, daytime, nighttime, and some are better than others. But ultimately, these radios, it'll all just be streaming. But I think for a complete adoption of just streaming is a ways off.
Yeah. Well, it's a long ways away from, you could only get KMOX in our hometown when there's a really clear sky at night. Away from there. Mr. Vickers, and then we'll go to Mr. Hornbuck.
Yes, Pop. Just over the years, you have switched some of your people on the radio morning to night and just shift them around. I'm just curious as to what factor, how did you decide to affect those swaps away?
Very good question. Our business is still far more art form than science. And there's really not an algorithm, if you will, in what the kids say today, to plan these things. You're really still talking about people and chemistry, and it's still more art. So it's still a judgment call. You pair people or you separate them, partly because you think that maybe you can create a better show, better content with a different combination. In the case of, we had Buck and Kincaid on afternoons for a long, long time. But we knew that when I brought Chuck Oliver and Matt Chernoff in and paired them back together, I knew ultimately they were going to be a younger, appealing, more contemporary show than Buck and Kincaid. And John and Buck had been with me for a long time, and they became, all of the great news talk programs, and the Rush Limbaughs of the world, Sean Hannity's, were always sort of in the middle of the day. They weren't doing morning drive or afternoon drive. So the middle of the day, I viewed sort of John and Buck as guys that sort of their tempo and temperament were better suited sort of in the middle of the day. Where Chuck and Matt, you're done with you're done with school, you're done with the day's work, and you're commuting home. You want to let your hair down a little bit and have some fun. And those two guys tended to be a little less serious. Now they know their stuff. They call Chuck the king of college football. He is an idiot savant when it comes to college football. I kid you not. He is the real deal. He really, really is. And he is, both of those guys are Atlantans through and through. So they truly know what they're talking about. They're not reading cue cards. But I felt that they were better suited in afternoons because different people use radio at different times of the day for different reasons. For information, you want news, traffic, and weather together in the morning to see how you dress the kids, or if your commute's full of bumper to bumper. And when you get that, then you kind of leave and you want to go catch up on sports or something else. A lot of people love to rock out at the end of the day. Their boss has been yelling at them all day long, and they want to get in the car and blast Taylor Swift or Led Zeppelin or whatever, Pink Floyd. Yes, absolutely. My suggestion. And so it tends to be you're a little more relaxed in the afternoons, and you're a little more open to sort of humor and fun than you are when you got your game face on in the morning. So does it always work out? No. We don't bat 1,000, and we've had people over the years say, I much prefer to have John and Buck back in the afternoons, or I liked it when Chuck and Matt were in the middle of the day, but because I can't listen in afternoons, and I can't listen to that program anymore. You're not going to please everybody all the time, but we do that. And last but not least, which is sort of just between us girls, sometimes they just bug the heck out of me and over and over and over and say, I want that day. I want that time slot. I want that time slot. It's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And eventually I'm like, oh, shut up. Okay, I'll put you in there. And I kid you not, that's just between us. But there's a little bit of that goes on too.
Oh, we've heard them complain on the air ourselves. They call you old man Dickey too. I'm going to call and tell on them.
And like any teenager, when you tell them, don't do that, what's the first thing they do when you leave the room? They do that.
Since you focus on college football, what's your thoughts on NIL, like how it's going to impact college sport?
Name, image, likeness.
In theory, NIL makes sense. I think the NCAA completely screwed that up. They knew this was coming for a long time. And by the way, the NCAA doesn't do anything without the presidents backing it. And the presidents across the board don't know what they're doing. And they're scared to death to lose their job. So they just sort of go along to get along because it's a great gig. They don't want to lose it. These guys and these men and women all make $1 million, $2 million bucks a year to sit around and shake hands and attend some dinners with fundraisers. And not as simple as that. They do a lot of work, but it's a great gig. And it's been unregulated. There are a lot of bad actors in it right now. Is NIL good? Some would argue it levels the playing field. And it's one of the reasons that Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban had such a public feud going, because Nick is the best at what he does and the best at taking kids having success on the college football field and then sending them to the NFL. The best. The state of Alabama, compared to the state of Texas, is very poor. And what Nick Saban cannot compete with is all of the big money donors at UT or Texas A&M giving big money so that they can go attract kids that normally Saban would get. And the pitch relative to Nick's, and that's why Nick got so frustrated and became more public than he normally does in his frustration, because he knows that what he's done up to that point doesn't matter anymore. When the University of Georgia opened up, and I've got a great partnership with them as we're the official sports talk of the Dogs, I went and toured the new weight room for the lounge area for the football team. Oh my God, those kids live unlike anybody else out there. And I recently, last fall, I toured the University of Florida. I was down the athletic facility. They tore down the baseball stadium and moved it to the far side of campus. And right in the middle of campus, they built an $80 million athletic complex for all the student athletes, for them to come for, they had a barbershop in there. They had, obviously game room and things like that, but they could get homework done. They could go in different rooms and study film or whatever. So they had their own pool. And I toured it before it was opened, before they officially opened it. And it's an arms race. But as the athletic director at both Georgia and University of Florida told me, the kids, before they'd come in the pitch with, the parents or grandparents in the living room was, in the last 5 years, I put X number of kids in the NFL. And mom or grandmom looking at that, and their son or grandson is going to get the $3 million signing bonus and make all the money in the world, and he's excited. He wants to take care of mom and grandmother. But today, they and that's great. And they didn't show these kids in the past. They would show them the weight room, they'd show them the dorm, they'd show them all of the luxuries that they had as a student athlete and how great it was. And see that refrigerator? It's stocked full of food. You can go in there 24 hours a day. And we've got to deal with Chick-fil-A. You can get Chick-fil-A all you want. And that was enough. Now the kids come in and look at that today and say, yeah, that's great. Where's my $1 million? And I said, so you don't need those things? And they said, no, you need those things. But that's just entry fee to get into the race. And at that point, these kids are all, including the parents or grandparents, are all they're all smart. They know, what is it? So a guy like Jimbo Fisher will sit there and say, sure, Nick Saban can put you in the NFL, but what if you get injured? You got no shot. You're done. Because the NFL, you're only good to them if you can perform. The minute you can't perform, they throw you out. And there are no guaranteed contracts for the most part. Certainly not like the NBA and Major League Baseball. But we, on the other hand, also put people in the NFL, but you can start day one on this campus with $1 million in your pocket. And so we're going to get you to the NFL, likely. You got to work hard, but you're going to start with money in your pocket. You can take care of mom, but then we're going to prepare you for the NFL. And University of Georgia told me, they said that you take the top, this was about a year and a half ago. We were talking about that very subject. And I said, just how big is the disparity? He said, we got a lot of wealthy donors. Our number one donor in terms of money to the athletic department annually wouldn't crack the top 25 in Texas. So I could, if they would only listen to me, and clearly nobody does, but I could really prove a point of how distorted and NIL is. It is the Wild West. You give me 3 donors. I'll go to a school like SMU or KSU. You give me 3 donors that are going to commit to me $1 million a year for 5 years. I will go out and find 3 of the best college football or college basketball players in the country, and I will make KSU or SMU within 2 years a Final Four team.
All right. Why are you waiting?
You give me 3 of the best. There are only 5 on the court. Some would argue you only need 2. Give me $3 million commitments per year for 5 years, and in 2 years, 3 years tops, I put SMU or KSU or Georgia State in the Final Four. That's why it scares the establishment. They will have to They will have to start to put some limitations on this thing right now, because you've got a lot of agents and people are out there that are trying to go get these kids. My son at Furman had to sit in just a month ago, had to sit in a meeting about NIL and they were explaining how these kids can, make a lot of money. My son, obviously been around me for a long time. He's like, Dad, that's a bunch of, I won't say what he said. And he said, there have been a number of examples of kids that have signed on to represent a car dealership, Georgia athletes or, athletes at University of Oklahoma or Florida or wherever. And people are touting that as it's a great way to get the kids paid. I'm not interested in that stat. Personally, show me how many of those deals have been renewed. Because I do marketing and advertising for a living. And I can tell you, if we don't work, we get fired very quickly. They like us. They like hanging out with us. They like my playoff tickets. But if we're not helping them achieve their goals, then they just say, I'm sorry, it's just not working out. The phone's not ringing. And so they let us go. So you can't make me believe that a lineman or a boy or girl that plays soccer at the University of Georgia or golf at Furman, all good kids, that child is going to help me sell more pizzas or hardware or roofing projects if I'm a local roofer. It's kind of silly. All they've achieved, in my humble opinion, and many of you may disagree with me, all they've achieved is they've legalized what once was always done, but done illegally, sort of behind the table, under the table.
Well, I got to tell you, Georgia doesn't crack the top 25 givers in Texas, because I think people that graduate in Georgia give to their churches faithfully.
Amen. Amen.
Let's cut it right there for now. So to respect David's time and your time, and if anybody,
maybe we got to get this gentleman was saying one more. I promise that'll be a short answer. Not little.
What's your succession plan?
That's a great question.
I have a few show ideas if you want.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Jared and I have been talking about that. My parents never pushed us into this business, and they didn't dissuade us from doing this. My brothers and I actually started a consultancy firm that we worked with radio and TV stations around the country, that we were doing strategy for them, and it gave us an opportunity, and we did this well into our 20s. And I remember my brother Lou and I looking at each other. We're here in Atlanta because one day we looked at each other in Toledo. We were building it out of there. And we were working with companies big and small and all over the Midwest and eventually beyond. And we said, my God, at 27, 28, we know more about this business than most 45 and 50-year-olds. Why are we not taking advantage of what our father knows and what we know? And so we sat down with my dad and said, and he was kind of semi-retired and said, you're too damn young. Let's do something. And we looked and looked and looked, and we ended up finding Ring Radio. At the time, it was actually in Chapter 11. And so my parents never pushed us. They really wanted us to work hard, to get educated, and work together, stick together. And that's what I've really preached to my kids. I own the Fan with my siblings, my 5 siblings. Dickey Broadcasting, and then our magazine company, Modern Luxury Media. And we own 85 magazines around the country, including Atlantan and Jezebel here in town. To me, the succession, it will go into, it's a family asset it's already sort of taken care of in terms of the estate people, if you will. They've sort of planned how it's done in trust. But to me, it's not so much the ownership of it as it is who runs it. And, my succession plan, and I think maybe part of your question is I've got the best team that I've ever worked with, and I think I've got the best team in radio and in all levels of management. And I think, if the good Lord takes me today, that we don't skip a beat, because the people that I've surrounded myself with are absolutely fantastic.
Amen. Everyone, round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.